right, I've got my notes. How's it going? Welcome live to Pros and Cons. I'm a.k.a. Bog with,
Captain 1701.
and this is something a little different. We've mostly been doing season reviews for Picard, and we've been talking about doing something like this for a long time. We want to call it Shuffle Trek, and the general idea, because we've already done the whole what is it called when you watch all of them?
The Star Trek Chronology Project.
Yeah, we've both done that like probably a total of twice cumulatively between the two of us.
Yeah.
And so rather than just do it again, we were going to put all of the episodes from the series into a big shuffle and mix them up and watch episodes and just give our thoughts as we go through the series randomly. And today, though, we decided to actually pick an episode, which is Star Trek, The Next Generation, Season 4, Episode 4, Suddenly Human. And the reason we chose this is because it ties into the recent Star Trek comic book, Resurgence, which I actually just read, but I'm going to reread and do a review on channel here later this week and talk about the comic, all in anticipation of the release of the new game coming out on May 23rd, 2023, which I guess has actually been delayed since at least April of 2022. And I actually think it looks like it might be a lot of fun. So I'm going to check that out.
Definitely.
But
I unfortunately haven't. I'm coming in a little. I don't really know the ins and outs and the details of Resurgence. I haven't cracked open the comics yet. I think I have all the ones you've sent me.
Cool.
But I haven't. So I'm kind of flying blind on the Resurgence themes and references. So.
Well, I don't think there's actually a whole lot there because I think Resurgence definitely takes place after this period. And so just going to the episode will be kind of cool. Seeing where we go. And I don't know. I took notes. Did you take any notes?
I didn't.
All right, cool. I'll kind of lead off of my list here. I took probably too detailed, like notes that are too detailed. But it started off with a captain's log, which was nice. And they mentioned the Talarian distress call, and there was a radiation leak, and then they go into the bridge, and they have this whole scene, and literally within like a couple minutes, they do this gigantic info dump that like sets everything up, and like it was kind of cool seeing like a classic Trek episode. Literally before we get the title card, they mention the Galarian border conflict. How the Talarians would booby trap their ships by their observation ships. They would abandon them and leave them set up to explode and put out a distress call. Data mentioned that this guerrilla tactic had resulted in 219 fatalities. And then they note that there is a Talarian ship coming to the area, but it's too far away to really do anything in time.
Well, plus, they're not really like equipped to take on the Enterprise either. Apparently.
Well, yeah, and like so they're coming out there, and the Enterprise, their perspective, they're kind of just like, well, we should probably help them out, but they're a little reluctant too because of these like guerrilla tactics that have resulted in attacks, and I believe they mentioned they use like an undetectable subspace trigger or something like that that can't be detected by their sensors or tricorders.
They kind of made the Talarians sound like super vicious, but then when you kind of run across them the first time, you're like, really? Like, why are these guys such a threat? Well, that was kind of my interpretation.
It's interesting too because the comic series does build on that, and it's whatever that conflict. Because all right, so throughout, and I was going to say you get the title card and everything. And one of the things I liked about this episode is several times it brought up like, politically sensitive topics like this. And I was like, oh, here we go. And then they would bring in the counter argument and they made points from both sides. And I was like, man, I like old Star Trek.
Yeah. It's like, season two.
It was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like season 2 of Picard was all just like how one side is destroying the Earth.
Well,
And they're like,
it was just like
everyone's
it's a lecture versus like a dialogue, or and to me, a lecture is not very entertaining. I'm not here for school or to be educated. I'm here for entertainment.
they're like, you're so dumb for letting your planet die. And you're like,
Well, we're not talking about the old
well,
badger.
I know, but I'm just pointing out that, dialogue is also a way to flush out topics and ideas and
Well,
discuss them in a way that's productive.
it's interesting you said, because this episode was very dialogue heavy. But when we come back from the title card, my first note was cool ship shots. And I actually know that several times throughout the series, you had very good miniature work with a remastered edition that I was streaming, and the ships looked really good. The models looked awesome, and you had several angles, and you had like a nice little flyby. And I've actually enjoyed the ship shots in this episode quite a bit.
I mean, yeah, if you could, sorry to keep comparing, but I mean the like the CGI ships that they started using in Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and then of course in the new shows they don't use any models. But like even the Enterprise D in Picard, it looked kind of like hot rod-ish.
Well, I don't mind the CGI ships. I actually like them because you
No, I
guys see a
don't
lot of
either.
details. But you can notice it
But
too, particularly with like the Orville, because they do use practical models in the first couple seasons, if not the third too, and it shows. The shots look amazing. They look great,
yeah,
and so it really is hard to replace really good model work with just CG. But the truth of the matter is too, as someone who like I'm kind of familiar with the whole process on what it takes to get all this out. And the big thing with the model work and everything is they have to do it all in a batch and everything. It's really hard for them to create custom new shots on a week-to-week basis. And so I think the sacrifice you get a lot of the time with having all model work is that you don't get a lot of episode-specific ship shots. And
right.
with you notice the difference with the end of DS9 and with Voyager big time, and in particular Star Trek Enterprise, because Star Trek Enterprise even did stuff with like the turrets and like the missiles and everything, and so they could get very specific, and so it's a give and take. And honestly, I like it when they use both.
Yeah, the NX had those crazy like shuttle pod claws or
Yep,
whatever because they didn't have tractor beams.
yep.
So
But
you could
I
with
like.
those you could get away with doing more cool stuff. I
Yeah.
agree.
So it's like a little give and take. My next note was the Talarians freaked out. So I think that's when we came on. Sometimes when we do pros and cons, we have audio issues. Particularly, the captain can't hear me frequently. And so this evening when we were booting up, I just was like going, "Can you hear me?" And I just made a continuous buzzing noise. And he just started on me. He's like, "Yes, I can hear you." He's like, he thought I was doing something from the episode, because this is where they do. I can't remember what they call it, but that's when they're freaked out or when they're like stressed. That's
Scared,
their
yeah.
way. Yeah, that's how they relieve stress.
Ah!
I look over at our levels and they're both like
And
red.
that scene was wild because it went way too long. I'm like, okay, we get the point. Like, shut these kids up. But Crusher and or Troy was kind of all over the place in this episode. She's like, they're scared. They can't stop. And then Picard comes in. He's just like, be quiet, damn it.
He's like, "What is this?"
And they all
Hold on. Yeah, and my note on that was like Picard's short fuse, and then also respect for the captain, and then the note that Beverly brings up was he abused, and
well, no, you didn't bring up that they discovered one of the four, I think it was actually five of the people from the ship. One of them is a 14-year-old human.
Yeah, you're right. We didn't mention that. That was actually before the title card, though. Yeah, yeah. But you're right. Yeah. So the question is, why is a human, a child, on this ship with all these other Talarians? Right. You're right. I did not mention that. Is the big question of the series here, And then, of course, Beverly raises the issue that he's got like broken ribs, a broken arm, and that these injuries appear to have taken place over a long, sustained period of time. And so she raises the question that maybe he's been abused by the Talarians, who are notoriously xenophobic and very much against outside alien species.
Yeah, and come to find out that this kid, and when we find out that when I forget who it was referred to Picard as captain, he immediately snaps to attention, kind of.
Yeah, I think when Picard shouted like the "Hey, stop that right now," and they're like, "Oh yes, Captain," he mentions that ladies in their society do never outrank men. Um, and then it jumps from there. My next note was that somebody mentioned that his grandma survives as an admiral, and they talk a little bit about like his family and like this colony that was destroyed by the Talarians.
Yeah, and what I thought was really cool, when they kind of track down who his family is, and they're kind of showing him the photos and stuff of his family, and the pictures of him actually too as a baby. He's sitting there and he like remembers every single thing that happened to his parents dying. So it's not like he didn't know them ever.
Right, there's it starts as like flashbacks kind of like coming in and everything, right? And so yeah, I think Picard brings him the photo after Troy tells him that he has to play daddy. That he needs to, in order for him to have an opportunity to reconnect with humans in any meaningful way, he needs to be able to connect with a human, and that because of his upbringing, it's not going to be possible for him to do so with any of the ladies. He needs to kind of connect with a man, and Troy mentions that she thinks it should be Captain Picard, and his face, man, he's just like, I do not like the way this conversation is going.
One of my favorite scenes too is kind of along that line where, the kid he's in his hammock or whatever because he doesn't like the beds, and the room's all dark, and he just has music just pounding, and Picard walks in and he's just like, "Turn that off," and he's just like, "What is this? Rock music," blah, blah, blah. Like,
dude, literally my next note is Picard disrespecting Juno's noise and heritage. He's like, what is this noise? But actually, he asked him, what was that? Or he asked the computer, what was that? And the computer states, that is a modern version of Talarian such and such rock or whatever. And then he kind of is like, all right, and he starts looking for him. So he kind of has an understanding of what it was,
But it's like, what teenager just hasn't gone to their room and slammed the door and just played like the loudest song that they know at the top of their speakers, And it's just funny, like Picard not wanting to be a dad or an authority figure for a child, has probably never experienced that before.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's gonna it's like a trope, kind of.
Yeah.
The old man dad walking into the room listening to like the garbage the son's listening to, but they kind of start to bond after that. Really, that was kind of like the beginning of them kind of bonding a little bit, I thought.
Well, there's a couple other things there. During that scene, they made note, Picard asked about his gloves and why they won't take them off, which earlier someone had tried to take his gloves off in sickbay, and that freaked him out, which is why Picard sent him to Picard's quarters. How often do we get to see Picard's quarters? Not too often, I don't think. A few times for sure, but I don't think it's a super common set. We'll see as we work through the episodes and everything. But
the gloves thing kind of goes towards the xenophobic nature of the species. Like they're not allowed to touch other aliens.
Well, they had hinted at it previously, but this is the first time in the episode they clearly stated it. And then Picard tries to tell him about his family, and Juno doesn't want to listen.
Well, this was after we met the captain of the Talarian ship.
I think that was not quite yet.
Oh, okay, never mind. I thought that was around the same time.
Let's see here. I'm looking. Well, just my next note was that be comfortable is uncomfortable with kids because this is the whole um conversation with Troy. And then it might want to have a note that says Picard is not cringing because she's like, "Oh, you're like it's so cringe." She says you're cringing or something like that, and he's like, visibly he is, you know. And she asks him flat to his face, "Did you have any friends as a child?" And his reaction is like, "Well, well, you know, I wanted to know exactly what I wanted to be since I was a young child, and everything I did since then was to become a Starfleet officer." You know what I mean?
But then after watching what we've seen in Picard, you're like,
I'm pretty sure the writers didn't see that part. You know what I mean?
no.
He would have been like, "Oh, sorry, mother. I'm too busy to play childish games right now because I'm studying to become an astrophysicist."
Maman,
Mama,
maman,
mama, mima.
maman.
Please don't.
Yeah, they didn't see this episode, that's for sure.
But yeah, so I know he always wanted to be in Starfleet. And he states specifically he skipped his child. He may have skipped his childhood, which is actually an interesting Picard moment.
I mean, it kind of. I mean, I could see Picard. I mean, I could see Picard being that straight laced as a kid, just disregarding everything that happened in the Picard series, because like the only times we see Picard as a young person, like a real young person, is the one where he's at the academy, and he gets stabbed or like impaled by that Nausicaan pirate, and he's got those two friends there at the academy. But that's really the only time we get a glimpse into young Picard. There's that one where they were transformed into children, him, Ro, and Guinan, but that was just him as a child, not
really,
Jean-Luc Picard.
I know
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, and actually, my next note is no music. He's not very understanding. So he went back to the quarters. Then they went to Troy's. Then they go back to it, and now he's set up his like little like hammock and everything. They have this conversation where he shows the photo and he talks to him about his parents, you know, and Juno, and he mentions that the Talarians killed them, and Juno says death is part of war, and then he kind of has like a little his first flashback where he's like, oh, you know, grabs his head and he hears the noises of his mom, like, you know, while his dad's like, take him, well, you know, and you hear shooting. It was pretty good.
That was an intense kind of flashback too.
Yeah.
I thought.
The next note I had was Indar on screen. Juno lives, and I thought that was a great scene. I liked Indar. I thought he was well portrayed.
He wasn't like over the top, like fighting his honor, blah blah. You know, he was like very measured still. Yep. And
no, I thought it was good on screen betrayal.
The explanation, like that he lost his own son and kind of adopted Juno, or what was his name?
Juno, Jeremiah Rosa was his human name. And it was a Talarian tradition that after that they could, if they've lost a child, that they could claim a slain enemy's child as their own.
That seems to go against their xenophobic nature, though, you think?
Well, I believe, well, and, you know, they didn't consider him human effectively. They raised him Talarian.
True. And I'm, you know, when they're talking about how...
But you're right. It does. That is a contradiction for sure.
When they're talking
it's a necessary contradiction for the story to happen, sir.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's cultural, like, I guess, in their culture to make sense, so they probably forgive that.
They probably, it's not even the thing.
But when they're talking about how, you know, Talarian sons are like raised to be warriors and that kind of thing, and they're like, well, what about the abuse? I was wondering, when I was watching this part or this whole episode, I'm wondering, like, what if they talked to Worf about being raised a Klingon? Like, I bet Worf had some broken bones and stuff as a kid. Like,
Well, we get into that. All kids have broken bones too. You know what I mean? And so it was like, but this was also came out in what 1991.
Right, but I'm just saying, like in terms of Star Trek, like Klingon warrior children are probably abused at some point as well, and they're looking at it from a human
Well,
perspective.
they admit by the end of the episode, I think we get there, that Picard states during his like final speech that they're not respecting their own culture, and that's he states it's a crime happened here. We aren't respecting in our effort to persuade him to choose us. We're not respecting what his own choices or whatever. So I think they lead back onto
Mhm.
that. So while they've had that
Yeah,
experience with the Klingons, where it's part of the episode and a necessary part of the script, because
right.
they're trying to have like Crusher's not trying to come at it as like, oh, we gotta take. She's coming at it like she's concerned for the child, and her first thought is because they've been rumored to, be or because they're known to be xenophobic that they may be abusing him. And I thought it was handled well because Picard comes back after meeting Endor and speaking with him and tells her he's like, I don't know that exactly that he was abused. He tells her flat out. He tells her that I have it written down in the notes whenever we get to it, but it's like he tells her something that like that I don't know. He basically he kind of had a good. I think he even states that his measure of Endor that was that he was somebody who was being honest and like loved Juno. You know what I mean?
He was talking about like that six-legged horse or whatever, and he fell off at once.
Yeah,
Like,
one day he will be a great warrior. You know,
yeah,
and like they had that. I actually really like that scene where they go back and forth, where he's like, dude, he's like, let me have my son, and he's like, I can't, we're gonna take him back to start, and he's like, I got my ships coming, and he's like, we're gonna start, don't start a war, and I think the line he says is, help me to avoid a conflict, is what he tells Picard. And I actually liked Endor. I thought he was great. I enjoyed him. I thought he was the
yeah.
highlight of the episode. Uh, they want to have Troy mentions that has to be a supervised visit with Endor and Juno, right? And Endar gives him a choice, and Endar and Juno clearly chooses Endar. You know what I mean? He says, "Yes, I want to go back to you, with you," and Picard's like, "We can't do that." And it's like, "Very well, our ships are on the way." And
This
then,
is kind of sorry. So
mm,
going off like what we were talking about with Endar, his character. This is something that these classic Star Trek episodes did really good with their like perceived villains of the series or of a specific show. A lot of times the villains weren't like evil or bad or even a villain per se. It was just the foil to the crew was just a different perspective on how to look at an issue. It was never like if I think if this was made now, it'd be like Endar is an evil guy. He's
well,
bad guy.
it
They
was set
wouldn't
up as he was a bad
they
guy,
wouldn't
but he clearly isn't during the
right.
episode. Like, right when I think one of the first lines he said that I wrote down when he appears on screen is when he's talking about the Galarian conflict. That Picard mentions that they attacked the Galarian colony, and Endar is like, "You mean when we repelled the aggressors?" You know what I
Right.
mean, right? And
But
so,
they would make I feel like if they'd make if it was on standard shows today, they'd make Endar a super bad villain guy, mustache twirly, just dark evil jerk, instead of
I think
coming
part
at
of
it from a
that's the action of a villain attacking it versus like this one. They're clearly they're not allies. You know what I mean? They're on opposite ends of what was apparently a very bad conflict. Right? And but at the same time, they're like having these discussions, even though they're quite contentious, and they're going back and forth, and they're going to their prospective ships, and they have their deadlines and everything. But I enjoyed this kind of Star Trek a lot more.
I do
I
too.
like Talkie Trek.
It's more diplomatic and like as opposed to let's just pull out our guns and shoot each other immediately.
So, but he gives Juno the chance to meet his grandmother, who's lost all of her kids. She lost her other son, and I guess Juno is the last Rosa, apparently. And she mentions many of your ancestors have given their lives for peace, which, was brutal, but also it was quite the line,
Yeah, it's an interesting line.
right? And once he's done listening to that message, and mind you, it wasn't live contact back and back. It was like a message because it's space and space is far, right? It took a little bit of time for them to send the notice to her that he was alive, and it took her a minute to write it down and send it back. So again, Star Trek respecting distances. I like that. Um, and Juno starts freaking out, and Picard's like, "What's going on? What are you doing?" And he's like, I can't relax here. I can't. I feel trapped. I can't run by the river. I can't get out." And so Picard tells him, "Well, let me tell you how I deal with this kind of stress." He's like, "Let's go play some racquetball." And to the holodeck we go with the racquetball, and they get suited up, and they have a nice little back and forth and everything. And they're competing, and Juno's scores a point, and they're all having a good time. And then he starts having more flashbacks, and we get more of that, and it's brutal. I think even the moment where like his mom dies, even or something like that, because it was
Yeah,
brutal.
he mentioned like he remember laying in her arms and trying to wake her up, and she
She was
wouldn't
like
wake up.
red, and yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, dude. All right, it was brutal, man.
that was harsh.
And then the next thing we see, they're in 10 forward, and he takes them, he sits them at a table with like Riker and Wesley, and he's laughing, having a good time. He accidentally explodes the banana split in a way that I don't think has ever possibly happened ever in the history of ever.
That's what
But
I thought
I
too.
said it was worth
Wesley,
it because Wesley got wrecked, and so I was
Wesley is
happy.
uh,
Hey, whatever.
Wesley
He
is
was there to get splooged on, so I'm okay with it.
he's such a tool though. Like he's such a goody two shoes. Like, oh, you want a banana split? Of course, Wesley would have a banana split. What a dork.
Dude. Well, and so
And
it's
then
getting near
Data's,
the. I was gonna say Data's
and
doing
then they
his
have a
thing.
well, then they have the cool Data thing where Riker's trying to explain like slapstick humor to him, and he's just like he's analyzing it, and then he's just like a situation where a joke is made off of a pie in the face, and Riker's like, "Do you think that's funny?" And Data's like, "No, I find it amusing." I thought that was great.
No, but I see. But you would find it.
I,
Yeah,
I see why you would think it was funny, but I don't.
yeah. Um, and Picard mentions like he was crying 5 minutes ago. Now he's laughing. He's trying to maybe he's connecting with his human self. And then the next shot is the assassination attempt. Middle of the night, Juno gets up and he's
Yeah.
just like, "I'm gonna stab this dude in the chest." And we cut from Picard seeing it from his perspective, getting the knife plunged into sickbay with him rushing and trying to work Picard. And luckily, his sternum deflected the knife blade. Otherwise, it could be much worse. So luckily, Picard's gonna be okay, and he's
That
mad.
positronic body.
He's pissed. He says, "I want to see him. Where is he? He's in security. Bring him here now." Right? And we actually and it says is Riker gonna have to explode these aliens? Because yeah, earlier it was mentioned, I think Data's like, "Oh yes, they have these kind of X-ray weapons and these kind of lasers, and they pose absolutely zero threat to us at all." And Riker's like, "Man, I really don't want to have to blow one of them up."
Right.
And Data's like, "Yeah, but they like definitely like fight to the death frequently, or whatever, right?"
I was waiting for Worf to be like, "Let's do it."
Let's do it. My note was, is Riker gonna have to smoke these aliens? And then, of course, my final note is nice little speeches. So we get a nice little speech from Juno or Jeremiah or whatever in sickbay to Picard, where he talks about how he was reconnecting, but how he like felt that was a betrayal of his father and what he had gifted him and what he had been taught and learned in his only home that he had known, and and how like getting to know Picard and them felt like betrayal, and him turning his back on his family and his home, and he could not allow himself to do that. And so he took this action against Picard, expecting that it would mean his death. He was effectively trying to commit suicide by Starfleet. You know what I mean? is what he effectively thought he was going to be executed by the captain's own hand for such an action, because that's how it is in Talarian society. And he was surprised to learn that was not what was going to happen, and it gave Picard a needed perspective check here. And so we go back to the bridge, and we see the Riker and the Talarians about to let loose, and they get up in attack formation, and they're like, "Oh God, guys, we're gonna have to do something here," you know. And Picard comes onto the bridge, and he gives his nice little speech about understanding the Talarian, you know, trying to convince Juno through these different methods and means was almost disruptive or untrue to their own mission, and you know what I mean. And they weren't being respectful of the Talarian society. And so I don't know. Is it good that the kid goes back with his, you know, his Stockholm syndrome captors or his family? Or it's a good episode. I thought it was an excellent episode, especially with Picard being like all uncomfortable with being a dad after all the stuff we got in the new season of Picard and everything, you know. And maybe this was a moment when he softened a little bit, I guess, right?
I think so. I would agree. It's a very good episode, and it does leave you at the end with that moral conundrum.
I thought it was good.
Like, but I think in this instance, the Starfleet and the crew they kind of have to respect the Prime Directive kind of thing.
Yeah.
And not interfere. Maybe if they had kept the kid, they would have had to recognize that they were aggressors in the situation, or whatever this conflict was about. You know, so they probably just had to kind of take the L on this one.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I don't know, man. I'm glad we watched it. Because so I read the comics just the other night, because I was like, I gotta do this and see what's what. And I was like, who is this? And I'll tell you, the comic focuses on another encounter between a Starfleet ship and the Talarians, who are working with and I'll leave it there. I'm going to talk about the comics in a separate video, but we'll come back to that at some point. But yeah, overall, man, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, good episode. Good like classic TNG moral conundrum.
Yeah,
thinking out a philosophical solution.
Dilemmas that aren't quite clear that make you think and give you, questions.
And in this episode, we learned it's not like a black and white kind of issue either.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I liked it.
Yeah.
Let's wind it down on that note here. We'll check in with you guys here soon. And otherwise, just thanks for tuning in. We're going to be back next week with a new episode.
See you later.
Probably bounced on like some cats. Ball now on my Mac, going all out on the track till I fall out on my back. Hating probably all on some crack. Money making all of that. Make it rain and holler back. If she lame, pimpin', a player ain't calling back. I get money. Get that money, man. Yo, you gotta invest. Put your skills to the test. Get this real, man. I'm blessed. Sent to kill with no rest. Playing still, I'm the best. Putting meals in the chest. Putting bills where I dress. Always chill, never stress. Trying to build up them checks. Players know I'm the man. Put the dough in my hand. Make it grow if you can. I'ma go